What would you do if the last $18 in your pocket were the only thing standing between your child and hunger? On a freezing November night in Riverside City, single father Daniel Cross gave that money to a desperate woman he'd never met. He didn't ask her name. He didn't expect anything back. 24 hours later, 5 black SUVs blocked the entrance to his crumbling apartment building. What followed exposed betrayal, power, and a truth Daniel was never meant to uncover. Stay until the end. This story changes everything. The termination letter sat folded in Daniel Cross's jacket pocket, edges worn from 3 days of handling. He could recite it from memory now. Effective immediately. Breach of project protocols. Evidence of financial misconduct. Termination without severance. Lies. Every single word. Daniel pulled his daughter Emma closer as they walked through the November cold toward Ironwood Apartments. The 7-year-old pressed against his side, her small hand gripping his sleeve. She hadn't asked about dinner yet, but she would. Kids always did when their stomachs started talking. "Dad," Mrs. Lynn said, "we can have soup again tonight." "That's nice of her, sweetheart." It was the 4th time this week their neighbor had offered food. Daniel's throat tightened with shame. Mrs. Lynn survived on disability checks. She couldn't afford to feed 2 extra mouths, no matter how kind her heart. 6 weeks ago, Daniel had been a structural engineer at Northline Engineering. Decent salary, health insurance, a future that didn't involve counting coins for bus fare. Then, Ryan Holt happened. Ryan, the golden boy supervisor with the perfect smile and the flexible ethics. When $15,000 disappeared from the Riverside Bridge project, someone needed to take the fall. Ryan had made sure that someone was Daniel. The evidence was manufactured purchase orders Daniel had never signed, bank transfers to an account he'd never opened. But manufactured evidence looked real enough to company management, and Daniel, with no money for a lawyer and a daughter to protect, had signed the termination papers in silence. Better to leave quietly than drag Emma through a legal battle they couldn't win. Now, 3 weeks after walking out of Northline's glass tower for the last time, Daniel's savings had evaporated. Rent was due in 5 days. The utility company had sent a final notice. The refrigerator held a 1/4 gallon of milk, 3 eggs, and half a loaf of bread. And in Daniel's wallet, worn leather splitting at the seams, $18 remained. $18 to last until Friday, when his unemployment check might arrive. $18 between Emma and genuine hunger. He'd already done the math. $6 for bread and peanut butter. $6 for milk. The rest for oatmeal and whatever fruit was cheapest. They could stretch it. They had to. Daniel pushed open the apartment door. Paint peeled from the frame in long strips. Inside, Emma's artwork covered walls too stained to repaint. She'd drawn their family before Mom, Dad, and daughter holding hands under a yellow sun. Caroline had been gone 2 years now. The drunk driver who killed her had served 4 months. Some days, Daniel wondered if the universe had it out for him specifically. "I've got homework," Emma announced, dropping her backpack onto the sagging couch. "Need help?" "It's just reading. I can do it." She could. Emma was bright, frighteningly so. Teachers said she read at a 5th grade level. Last parent conference, Mrs. Patterson had mentioned gifted programs. Special schools. Daniel had nodded and smiled while calculating that special schools meant application fees, uniforms, supplies, none of which mattered when you couldn't guarantee tomorrow's breakfast. He watched Emma settle cross-legged on the floor, textbook open, lips moving as she read. Her sneakers had holes in the toes. He'd patched them twice with duct tape, but the November cold seeped through anyway. Daniel pulled out his phone. 3 job applications submitted yesterday, 7 the day before. Not a single callback. He typed a message to his former colleague, Aaron Wells, asking if any positions had opened up. The checkmark turned blue. Aaron read it. No reply came. That's how it worked now. People who'd eaten lunch with him for 5 years suddenly didn't recognize his number. Outside, the sun dropped behind the Ironwood Apartments' gray facade. Daniel checked his watch. 4:15. The city bus ran until midnight, but the routes changed after 9. If he wanted to make it to the West Harbor District Workforce Center tomorrow morning, he'd need to catch the 6:30 bus, which meant waking Emma at 5:30, which meant another morning of her stumbling through the dark, tired and hungry, pretending everything was fine. Daniel pressed his palms against his eyes. The pressure helped somehow, kept the despair contained where Emma couldn't see it. "Dad?" Her voice came soft from across the room. "Are we going to be okay?" The question every parent dreaded, the one that demanded a lie wrapped in hope. "Yeah, sweetheart." Daniel lowered his hands and managed a smile. "We're going to be just fine." Emma studied him with those dark, knowing eyes, Caroline's eyes. Then she nodded and returned to her book, accepting the lie because she loved him. Daniel turned away before his expression could betray the truth. The West Harbor District bus terminal never truly slept. At 11:40 p.m., it hummed with the city's forgotten third-shift workers heading to warehouses, night cleaners finishing their rounds, insomniacs riding loops because the buses were safer than empty apartments. Daniel sat on a metal bench near Gate 7, collar turned up against the wind that howled through the terminal's open sides. Emma was home with Mrs. Lynn. He'd promised to be back by 1 a.m., which meant catching the 12:15 bus, transferring at Highland Station, then walking the final 8 blocks because night routes didn't cover Ironwood's neighborhood. The workforce center had been a bust. 47 people competing for 12 warehouse positions that paid minimum wage. Daniel had filled out the application anyway, hands cramping around the pen. Knowing his engineering degree made him overqualified for loading boxes, but underqualified for anything else without references. No one called terminated employees for references. He pulled the $18 from his wallet. 3 5s, 3 1s. The bills felt thin, almost translucent under the terminal's fluorescent lights. In 3 days, this money had transformed from pocket cash into a lifeline. Daniel counted it again, as if the numbers might have changed. 18. Still 18. The math played out automatically now. Bus fare to Highland Station, $2.50. Walk the rest. That left $15.50. Bread, $3.49. Meek. Fire comma to knee. Oatmeal, $2.89. Total, $14.66. 84 cents left over. Maybe a banana. Maybe. Emma loved bananas. The 12:15 bus pulled into Gate 7 with a hydraulic hiss. Daniel stood, muscles stiff from the cold, and reached for his wallet. "Wait, please wait!" The voice cut through the terminal's ambient noise, desperate, raw, female. Daniel turned. A woman ran toward the bus, coat flapping open, hair wild around her face. She stumbled, caught herself against a bench, kept moving. Even from 15 feet away, Daniel could see she was shaking. The bus driver, a heavy-set man with gray stubble, glanced at the woman and began closing the doors. "Please." The woman reached the bus, slapping her palm against the closing door. "Please, I need to get on." The driver shook his head, pointed at the fare box. The woman fumbled in her pockets, pulled out a handful of coins. They slipped through her trembling fingers, pinging across the pavement. Quarters, dimes, nickels scattering into the terminal shadows. "Ma'am, if you can't pay the fare, I have money. Please just wait." She dropped to her knees, scrambling for the coins. Her coat fell open. Underneath, she wore what looked like expensive clothes, torn and stained. A silk blouse, missing buttons, dress pants with the hem ripped. Something was very wrong here. Daniel watched her gather 30, maybe 40 cents. Not enough. Not even close. The bus driver released the brake. The engine growled. The woman looked up, and for one moment, her eyes met Daniel's. In that look, he saw something he recognized with perfect, painful clarity. Desperation. The kind that made time stop and choices narrow until there was only one question left. How do you survive the next 5 minutes? Daniel looked down at the $18 in his hand. The woman stood slowly, coins clutched in one fist. Even in the harsh terminal lighting, Daniel could tell she didn't belong here. Her bone structure suggested wealth, good nutrition, a lifetime of advantages. The watch on her wrist, now scratched and hanging loose, was worth more than Daniel's entire month's rent. Yet here she was, on her knees, begging for bus fare. "Ma'am, I'm pulling out." The driver's hand moved toward the door control. "Wait." Daniel stepped forward. "Hold on." The driver's eyes shifted to him, annoyed but patient. City bus drivers learned patience, or they didn't last. Daniel approached the woman. Up close, the wrongness intensified. Her coat was cashmere, probably $1,000 new. The blouse underneath bore a designer label visible through the tear, but her knees were scraped, her stockings shredded. A bruise darkened her left cheekbone. She'd been in trouble. "Recently. I'm sorry," she whispered, not looking at him. "I'm sorry. I need to get somewhere safe." Her accent was educated, refined. The voice of someone who gave orders, commanded rooms, signed contracts. Now it shook with exhaustion and fear. Daniel's mind cataloged the details automatically. Engineers training, observe, assess, analyze. The evidence told a story. Expensive clothes, visible injuries, no wallet or phone, extreme distress. Robbery, assault, something worse? Not your problem, the survival instinct whispered. You have $18 and a hungry daughter. Whatever happened to this woman is not your responsibility. But Daniel's hand was already moving toward his wallet. "How much is the fare?" he asked the driver. $2.50 to Highland, $4.75 to Terminal End. "Where do you need to go?" Daniel asked the woman. She looked up at him, finally. Her eyes were gray, red-rimmed from crying. "Northbridge, the Plaza District. Expensive neighborhood. Far. That's Terminal End," the driver confirmed. $4.75. Daniel pulled out a $5 bill. The woman's expression shifted surprise, hope, something that might have been shame. "I can't." "Yes, you can." Daniel handed the bill to the driver. For her, the driver took it, punched the fare machine, held out a quarter in change. Daniel waved it off. "Keep it." He turned back to the woman. She was staring at him like he'd performed a miracle instead of a simple transaction. "Thank you," she said. I don't know how to. You don't need to explain." Daniel stepped back toward his bench. "Just get somewhere safe." The woman climbed onto the bus, moving like every muscle hurt. She paused at the top step, turned back. "What's your name?" Daniel hesitated. Names created connections, expectations. He didn't need connections. He needed to get home to Emma. But something in the woman's face, the naked gratitude, the desperate need to make this transaction human instead of transactional, made him answer. "Daniel." "Daniel Cross." "Isabella." She swayed slightly, caught herself on the handrail. Isabella Vaughn. The name tickled something in Daniel's memory, but the connection wouldn't come. Too tired, too stressed, too focused on the fact that he now had $13 instead of 18. "Thank you, Daniel Cross." Isabella's voice steadied slightly. "I won't forget this." Empty words, Daniel thought. The kind people said when they meant well but would forget by morning. He nodded anyway. The bus doors closed. Through the scratched window, Daniel watched Isabella collapse into a seat near the back, head in her hands. The bus pulled away, red taillights fading into the November night. Daniel looked down at his wallet. $13. He'd just given $5 to a woman whose watch cost more than his car used to be worth. The math recalculated automatically. $13. No bus fare home now. That meant walking 4 miles in the cold, which meant getting home at 2 a.m. instead of 1. Which meant Mrs. Lynn would worry. Which meant Emma might wake up and find him gone. Daniel zipped his jacket and started walking. The wind cut through the terminal's open sides, carrying the smell of diesel and rain. Behind him, the 12:15 bus to Highland Station pulled away without him. It would be a long walk home. The walk from West Harbor District to Ironwood Apartments normally took 90 minutes. In November, after midnight, with wind that turned the cold into something sharp enough to cut, it took longer. Daniel kept his head down and his pace steady. Cars passed occasionally, headlights sweeping across empty storefronts and chain-link fences. This part of the city didn't sleep so much as hold its breath until morning. His mind replayed the scene at the bus terminal on an endless loop. The woman's eyes, the torn clothes, the desperate scramble for coins, the $5 bill leaving his hand. What had he been thinking? He hadn't been thinking. That was the problem. He'd reacted on instinct, on some buried impulse that said helping people mattered more than simple survival math. Stupid. Caroline would have called it noble. Emma would have called it brave if she knew. But Emma wouldn't know, because Daniel wasn't going to tell her that Daddy gave away grocery money to a stranger who'd probably never think of him again. $13. Bread and milk, that's what $13 bought. Maybe peanut butter if it was on sale. Oatmeal if he was lucky. No banana for Emma. The thought hit harder than the wind. It was just a banana. Meaningless in the scheme of things. But it represented every small joy Daniel could no longer provide: treats, surprises. The tiny luxuries that made childhood bearable. He'd traded Emma's banana for a stranger's bus fare. Daniel's hands clenched in his pockets. The cold had turned his fingers numb an hour ago. He couldn't feel the $13 anymore, which seemed appropriate. Money he couldn't spend might as well not exist. The thought came unbidden. What if Isabella Vaughn actually was someone important? What if that watch was real, those clothes authentic? What if Daniel killed that fantasy before it could grow roots? The world didn't work that way. Good deeds didn't get rewarded with miracles. They got rewarded with the satisfaction of having done something decent, which was its own payment and also its own curse. He'd done something decent. Now Emma would eat less this week. That was the transaction. Complete. Final. The Ironwood Apartments emerged from the darkness like a concrete tombstone. 4 stories of peeling paint and broken dreams. Home. Daniel checked his phone. 1:47 a.m. Mrs. Lynn's apartment was dark. Good. She'd gone to bed. Emma was safe. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, each step an exercise in willpower. His legs had gone beyond pain into a distant, echoing ache. The apartment door stuck, it always stuck, and Daniel had to shoulder it open. Inside, Emma slept on the couch, wrapped in her winter coat because the heating hadn't been consistent lately. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold air. A drawing lay on the floor beside her, another family portrait. This one with just 2 figures holding hands under a moon instead of a sun. Daniel lifted Emma carefully, carried her to the bedroom, tucked her into the bed they shared. She stirred but didn't wake. He stood there for a long moment, watching her sleep, doing the math he didn't want to do. $13. 3 days until the unemployment check. Assuming the check came. Assuming it wasn't delayed again like last month, Emma would be hungry, would ask questions, would pretend she wasn't hungry when she was, because that's what good kids did when their parents were drowning. Daniel turned away from the bed and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, lights twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, Isabella Vaughn had reached Northbridge Plaza. Somewhere out there, she'd stepped off that bus and walked into whatever safe place she'd been desperate to reach. She'd probably forgotten Daniel's name already. The thought didn't bother him as much as it should have. He'd done what he'd done. The universe didn't owe him anything for it. Daniel pulled out his phone one more time. No messages, no missed calls, no job offers, no returned texts, no acknowledgement from a world that had moved on without him. He opened his banking app. Balance: $47.23. Rent was $850. Due in 4 days. Daniel closed the app and set the phone on the nightstand. Tomorrow, he'd figure something out. Tonight, Emma was safe and warm and sleeping peacefully. That was enough. It had to be. Morning came too early, as it always did. Daniel woke to Emma shaking his shoulder, her face inches from his. "Dad. Dad, wake up." He forced his eyes open. Gray light filtered through the bedroom's single window. His body protested movement. 4 miles in the cold had left muscles he'd forgotten about, screaming for attention. "What time is it?" His voice came out rough. 7:30. You slept past your alarm. Damn. Daniel sat up, head spinning. He'd meant to be at the workforce center by 8. There was a construction company allegedly hiring day laborers. Cash under the table. It wasn't legal, but legal stopped mattering when the rent was due. "I'll make breakfast," Emma announced, already moving toward the kitchen. "Wait, But she was gone, and Daniel didn't have the energy to argue. He pulled himself out of bed, muscles protesting every movement. The apartment was cold enough that his breath fogged. In the kitchen, Emma stood on her step stool, carefully pouring milk into a bowl. The cereal box, generic brand, half empty, sat on the counter. "We're running low," she observed, matter of fact. "I know. Mrs. Lynn said she could. We're not taking any more from Mrs. Lynn." Daniel's voice came out sharper than intended. Emma flinched. He forced himself to soften. "I mean, she's done enough for us. We'll be okay." Emma studied him with those two knowing eyes. "You walked home last night. I heard you come in at 2. She'd been awake." Of course, she'd been awake. 7-year-olds didn't sleep through their father's vanishing until the middle of the night. The bus routes changed, Daniel lied. Had to take the long way. Emma nodded, accepting this the way she accepted everything with quiet resignation that no child should have mastered. They ate breakfast in silence. The cereal was stale. The milk was 1 day from expiring. Emma didn't complain. After she left for school, walking herself the 4 blocks because Daniel couldn't afford to be late to the labor site, Daniel checked his phone. 1 new message. Unknown number. His thumb hovered over the notification. Probably spam. Probably someone trying to scam him out of money he didn't have. He opened it anyway. "Mr. Cross. This is Isabella Vaughn. I need to see you. Today, if possible, I'll be at Northbridge Plaza, Sterling Coffee, at 2 p.m. Please come. I owe you more than bus fare." Daniel read it 3 times. Isabella Vaughn. The woman from the terminal. She'd tracked down his number somehow, wanted to meet, mentioned owing him. The cynical part of Daniel's brain, the part that had been carved out by Ryan Holt's betrayal and 3 weeks of unemployment, whispered warnings. This was a scam. Had to be. Woman playing the victim, getting him to help, then somehow using that kindness as leverage for something worse. But the message included an address, a real place. Northbridge Plaza was a high-end shopping district. Sterling Coffee was probably one of those places where a regular cup cost $8. Daniel looked at his wallet. $13. The labor site would pay maybe $60 for a full day's work if they hired him. That was rent money, food money, survival money. This was probably nothing. A simple thank you. Maybe she'd give him the $5 back. Maybe, or maybe she'd forgotten entirely, and this message was some kind of automated system, and he'd waste an afternoon he couldn't afford to waste. Daniel stared at the message. At 1:45, he left for Northbridge Plaza. Northbridge Plaza existed in a different city than Ironwood Apartments. Same metropolitan area, same zip code prefix, but the resemblance ended there. Here, the sidewalks were clean. Trees lined the streets, dormant for winter but obviously cared for. Shop windows displayed clothes that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent used to be. People walked with purpose and prosperity, carrying bags from stores Daniel had only seen in advertisements. Sterling Coffee occupied a corner lot with floor-to-ceiling windows. Through the glass, Daniel could see leather chairs, polished wood tables, a marble counter. The menu board listed drinks he didn't recognize. He stood outside for 3 minutes, trying to convince himself to walk in. He didn't belong here. His jacket had a stain on the sleeve from Emma's breakfast mishap last week. His jeans were worn at the knees. His boots had more tape than leather at this point. But Isabella had asked him to come. Daniel pushed through the door. Warmth enveloped him immediately, along with the smell of expensive coffee and something baking. The woman behind the counter looked up with a practiced smile that faltered slightly when she took in his appearance. "Just meeting someone," Daniel said quickly, before she could ask if he needed help finding the exit. He spotted Isabella immediately. Corner table, facing the door. She looked nothing like the desperate woman from the terminal. Her hair was styled, pulled back in a professional twist. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost 4 figures. The bruise on her cheek had been covered with makeup, though Daniel could still see the shadow of it if he looked closely. She stood when she saw him. "Daniel, thank you for coming." Her voice was steady now, completely in control. This was the voice that ran meetings, made decisions, expected obedience. "Miss Vaughn, Isabella, please." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. Can I get you something?" "The coffee here is exceptional." Daniel sat, aware of every eye in the coffee shop tracking him. "I'm fine." Isabella studied him for a moment, then raised a hand. The barista appeared instantly. "2 Americanos, please, and whatever pastries you recommend." "That's really not. It's the least I can do." Isabella folded her hands on the table. "I owe you an explanation." Daniel waited. "Last night," Isabella began, "I was returning from a business meeting in West Harbor. Not my usual territory, but a development deal required my personal attention. My driver dropped me at the office to get my car. I was in the parking garage when..." She paused, jaw tightening. "When someone attacked me from behind, took my phone, my wallet, my keys, everything." Daniel's engineer brain processed this. The parking garage at West Harbor Business District. Vaughn Industries owns the building. The name clicked. Vaughn Industries, one of the largest commercial development firms in the region. Daniel had bid on their projects back when he worked at Northline. He was sitting across from a CEO, a woman worth millions, who'd needed his $5 to get home. "I reported it to building security this morning," Isabella continued. "They found footage. The man who attacked me was..." Her expression hardened. "Someone I trusted, someone who had access to the building, who knew I'd be there alone. An employee? My vice president of operations." Isabella's voice could have cut glass. "Mark Dalton. We've worked together for 8 years." Daniel sat back. The pieces were connecting, forming a picture he didn't like. He planned it. The attack. He planned more than that. Isabella reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope, set it on the table between them. "But that's a conversation for later. First, I need to repay a debt." Daniel looked at the envelope. It was thick. "Miss Vaughn." "Isabella. Isabella, you don't owe me anything." It was $5. It was $5 you couldn't afford to give. Her gray eyes held his. "Don't think I didn't notice the way you counted that money, the way you hesitated. You gave me your bus fare, didn't you?" Daniel said nothing. "You walked home, 4 miles, in the cold, because you gave me money you needed." Isabella pushed the envelope closer. "That kind of sacrifice deserves more than bus fare repayment." Daniel didn't touch the envelope. "I didn't help you for a reward. I know." Isabella's expression softened slightly. "That's exactly why I'm offering you one." Daniel stared at the envelope like it might explode. "There's $5,000 in there," Isabella said quietly. "Cash." enough to solve your immediate problems. Consider it a gift. $5,000. Rent, food, heat. Maybe enough left over to get Emma winter boots that didn't have holes. Daniel's hand moved toward the envelope, then stopped. "Why?" he asked. "I told you. You helped me when—" "No." Daniel met her eyes. "Why are you really doing this? CEOs don't track down strangers to hand them cash. You could have wired me the money. You could have sent an assistant with a check. Why meet in person? Why this?" Isabella leaned back, a slight smile touching her lips. "I'm careful. There's a difference. Fair enough." She paused, as if deciding how much to share. "Daniel, can I ask what you do for a living? Or did, before you ended up counting bus fare at midnight?" "I was a structural engineer. Northline Engineering. They terminated me 3 weeks ago." "For what reason?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Financial misconduct. Falsified invoices on the Riverside Bridge project. $15,000 allegedly funneled to a personal account. Allegedly. I didn't do it." The words came out harder than Daniel intended. "My supervisor, Ryan Holt, set me up. But I couldn't prove it, and I couldn't afford a lawyer. So I walked away." Isabella nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "That's what I thought. Excuse me?" She reached into her bag again, this time pulling out a tablet. A few taps brought up a document. She turned the screen toward Daniel. It was a personnel file. His personnel file from Northline, complete with performance reviews, project summaries, and a termination notice that made his stomach clench even now. "How did you get that?" Daniel demanded. "I have resources." Isabella scrolled to a different document. "This is your supervisor's financial records, public tax filings, mortgage applications, the usual paper trail people leave." Daniel leaned forward. The numbers swam slightly, exhaustion and hunger making concentration difficult, but the pattern was clear. Ryan Holt had purchased a new house 6 months ago, a vacation property 2 months after that. The mortgage applications showed income inconsistent with a supervisor's salary. "He's been stealing for years," Isabella said. "Small amounts from multiple projects. Nothing large enough to trigger audits. And when your project started showing discrepancies, he needed a scapegoat." "Why are you showing me this?" Isabella closed the tablet. "Because I need your help, Daniel, and because I think you need mine." The coffee shop's ambient noise conversations, espresso machines, the soft jazz playing overhead, faded into background static. Daniel focused entirely on the woman across from him. "Help with what?" "Mark Dalton, the man who attacked me, didn't do it for money." Isabella's voice dropped. "He did it because I discovered what he's been doing. Vaughn Industries is worth approximately $400 million. We own commercial real estate across 6 states. And for the past 3 years, Mark has been systematically funneling projects to shell companies he controls." "How much?" "Conservatively, $30 million. Daniel let out a breath. "That's not embezzlement. That's empire building." "Exactly." Isabella's expression hardened. "Mark isn't stealing to get rich. He's stealing to build leverage. When the board discovers the losses, he'll offer to fix everything, but only if they make him CEO. I'll be removed for incompetence. He'll walk in as the savior. And last night? Last night was about buying time. He needed me disoriented, disconnected, unable to access my resources for a few critical hours. He didn't expect me to make it home. He certainly didn't expect me to recover this quickly, because of $5 and a bus ride. Because of you." Isabella leaned forward. "Daniel, I've spent this morning reviewing Mark's schemes. They're sophisticated, layered, designed to be almost impossible to untangle. But there's one consistent element." "What's that?" "They all involve construction projects, bidding irregularities, cost overruns, material substitutions." Her eyes locked onto his. The kind of thing a structural engineer would understand instinctively. The pieces clicked together. Daniel sat back. You want me to help you prove what Dalton's doing. I want you to help me destroy him. Isabella's voice carried absolute conviction. The same way Ryan Holt destroyed you. The same way men like them have always operated by making honest people take the fall. I'm not an investigator. I don't even have a job. You have skills. You have motivation. And you have nothing to lose. Isabella pushed the envelope closer again. This is a retainer. $5,000 to secure your time for the next 2 weeks. If you help me expose Mark, there's more. Much more, including connections to ensure Ryan Holt answers for what he did to you. Daniel looked at the envelope. At Isabella. At the coffee shop full of people who'd never counted their last $18. This isn't charity, Isabella said softly. This is business. I'm hiring you because you're exactly what I need, someone who understands how these schemes work because you've been a victim of one. And if we fail, then Mark becomes CEO, I lose my company, and you keep the $5,000. But we're not going to fail. Isabella extended her hand across the table. Do we have a deal, Daniel Cross? Daniel stared at her hand. This was insane. He was unemployed, nearly homeless, with no resources and no leverage. Isabella was offering him a lifeline wrapped in revenge against the entire system that had crushed him. It was stupid to say yes. It was probably suicidal. But the alternative was watching Emma go hungry while Ryan Holt lived comfortably in his stolen house, and Mark Dalton walked away with $400 million. Daniel shook Isabella's hand. We have a deal. Vaughn Industries occupied 15 floors of the Sterling Tower in Northbridge's financial district. Isabella's office was on the top floor, a corner suite with windows overlooking the city. Daniel stood at those windows now, watching traffic crawl through downtown streets 30 stories below. Behind him, Isabella worked at her desk, fingers moving across her keyboard with precise efficiency. Coffee? She asked without looking up. I'm fine. You're exhausted. When's the last time you slept properly? Daniel didn't answer. The honest response, not since my wife died, felt too raw for a business arrangement. Isabella stood, walked to an elaborate coffee maker that probably cost more than Daniel's entire kitchen, and began preparing 2 cups anyway. I'm going to make you coffee. You're going to drink it. Then we're going to work. Yes, ma'am. She glanced at him, amused. Don't call me ma'am. It makes me feel ancient. You're what? 38? 36. And you're 34. See? We're practically the same generation. Isabella handed him a cup. The china was thin enough to be translucent. Now, let me show you what Mark's been doing. She led him to a conference table where documents were spread in careful rows. Project bids, construction contracts, material invoices. To an untrained eye, it probably looked random. To Daniel, patterns emerged immediately. The Riverside Bridge project, he said, pointing to a document. You worked on that? Until Ryan accused me of fraud. Daniel leaned closer. But this bid, the materials cost is inflated by about 15%. Mark approved it. He approved all of them. Isabella pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop. Look at the pattern. Every project where costs exceeded projections has Mark's signature on the approval forms. Daniel moved from document to document. But he's smart about it. The overruns are never large enough to trigger detailed audits. 5% here, 8% there. And the excess funds? Daniel traced the invoice numbers. Shell companies. I recognize this one, Riverside Materials Incorporated. They supplied concrete for the bridge project. They're owned by a holding company called Dalton Enterprises. Mark's not even hiding it? He is. Isabella pulled up corporate filings. Dalton Enterprises is registered to his brother. The brother is a co-owner on paper, but all financial decisions route through Mark. It's technically legal, just unethical. Daniel sat down, mind racing through the implications. This isn't just theft. This is systematic fraud. Years of it, 3 years, minimum. Probably longer. Isabella's voice was tight with controlled anger. Mark built an empire inside my company. Every project he touched became a funding source for his shell corporations. And when I started noticing the patterns last month, he decided to remove you, permanently, if he'd had his way. Isabella touched the makeup, covering her bruise unconsciously. He drugged my coffee before I left the office, something mild enough that I could drive but strong enough that I'd be disoriented. Then he arranged for his mugger to intercept me in the parking garage. The attack wasn't random. Nothing Mark does is random. He planned for me to be robbed, maybe injured seriously enough to require hospitalization. At minimum, I'd lose access to my phone and computer for long enough that he could move pieces on the board. Daniel studied the documents with new understanding. What pieces? Isabella pulled out another file. Emergency board meeting. Scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. The agenda claims they need to discuss leadership stability concerns and recent financial irregularities. He's making his move. He's forcing the board to choose between keeping me a CEO who's been acting erratically and is now showing signs of mental instability after a traumatic mugging, or promoting Mark to acting CEO during a temporary transition period, which becomes permanent once he fixes the financial problems he created. Exactly. Isabella's jaw tightened. By this time tomorrow, unless we stop him, I'll be out and Mark will have everything he wanted. Daniel looked at the documents, at the patterns of fraud and manipulation. Ryan Holt's betrayal had been crude by comparison, a simple frame job with falsified paperwork. Mark Dalton had spent years building an intricate system designed to transfer power and wealth invisibly. We have less than 24 hours, Daniel said, and we need proof the board can't ignore. Proof that ties Mark directly to the shell companies, the fraud, and the attack. That's the challenge. Isabella met his eyes. Can it be done? Daniel picked up the Riverside Bridge contract. His contract, the one that had ended his career and nearly destroyed his life. Yes, he said quietly. But we're going to need help. What kind of help? Daniel pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't touched in 3 weeks. Aaron Wells, his former colleague at Northline. The man who'd ignored his messages. I need to talk to someone who understands Ryan Holt's system, Daniel said, because I'm betting Mark Dalton learned from the same playbook. Aaron Wells agreed to meet at a diner on the outskirts of the city. Neutral territory, away from Northline Engineering and Vaughn Industries both. Daniel arrived first, sliding into a booth that faced the door. Old habits from his father, who'd been a cop. Always watch the exits, always see who's coming. Aaron appeared at 7:15, 15 minutes late. He looked older than Daniel remembered, grayer, more worn. He spotted Daniel and hesitated, conflict clear on his face. Then he sat down anyway. You've got nerve calling me, Aaron said without preamble. You've got nerve ignoring my messages for 3 weeks. What did you expect? You got fired for fraud. HR sent a company-wide memo warning us not to contact you. I was framed. That's what they all say. Daniel leaned forward. Ryan Holt stole $15,000 from the Riverside project. He funneled it through falsified invoices to a company called Riverside Materials, the same company that supplied substandard concrete to the bridge supports. Aaron's expression shifted slightly. Not quite belief, but interest. Riverside Materials is owned by Dalton Enterprises, Daniel continued, which is owned by a man named Philip Dalton. Philip's brother is Mark Dalton, VP of Operations at Vaughn Industries. So Ryan and Mark are running the same scheme at different companies. Inflated bids, shell companies, systematic fraud. The only difference is scale. Aaron sat back. That's a hell of a conspiracy theory. It's not a theory. Daniel pulled out his phone, showed Aaron the documents Isabella had provided. This is real. Mark's been stealing for years, and Ryan learned from him. Aaron studied the documents in silence. Daniel could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Risk versus reward. Safety versus justice. "Why come to me?" Aaron asked finally. "Because you're the only person at Northline who didn't completely ghost me. Because you worked with Ryan long enough to see the cracks in his system. And because Daniel met his eyes. Because I think you know I'm telling the truth." Aaron said nothing for a long moment. "The Riverside Bridge," he said quietly. "The concrete did fail inspection. 3 times. Ryan blamed the suppliers, said they'd cut corners. We had to demolish 2 sections and re-pour, because the materials were substandard. Because the materials came from a company that existed only on paper." Aaron's voice dropped. "I flagged it. Told Ryan we should investigate the supplier. He told me to drop it." "Did you?" "I didn't have a choice. Ryan's protected. Management loves him, and anyone who questions him too loudly ends up." Aaron gestured at Daniel. "Like you." Daniel leaned back. "What if I told you there's a way to bring him down? Ryan? Mark? The whole system? I'd say you're dreaming. Isabella Vaughn is filing charges against Mark Dalton tomorrow. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, assault. The evidence is solid. When Mark goes down, Ryan's connection to Dalton Enterprises goes public." Aaron's eyes widened. "You're working with Vaughn?" "She hired me to help expose Mark. In the process, we uncovered Ryan's role. If you testify about the Riverside materials issues, about Ryan's refusal to investigate, I'll lose my job. You'll be a whistleblower. There are protections. Protections don't pay mortgages." Aaron shook his head. "Daniel, I'm sorry about what happened to you. I really am. But I've got a family. I can't risk." "Emma is 7 years old," Daniel interrupted. "She's eating stale cereal for breakfast because I gave my last $5 to a stranger on a bus. She wears shoes with holes in them. She draws pictures of our family without her mother because her mother is dead and her father is too broken to give her anything better." Aaron flinched. "I'm not asking you to risk everything," Daniel continued. "I'm asking you to do the right thing. Just once. Tell the truth about what you saw." Silence stretched between them. Outside, traffic hummed past the diner. Aaron stood. "I need to think about it. We don't have time. I said I need to think." Aaron pulled out his wallet, dropped a 10 on the table even though he hadn't ordered anything. "If I do this, if I testify, Ryan will destroy me the same way he destroyed you. Only if Mark walks away free," Daniel said. "If Mark goes down, Ryan loses his protection. The whole system collapses." Aaron looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the diner. Daniel sat alone in the booth, staring at the $10 bill on the table. Either Aaron would help, or he wouldn't. Either way, the board meeting was tomorrow at 10 a.m., and Daniel had one more move to make. The board meeting began at 10 a.m. sharp. Daniel watched from a conference room adjacent to the main boardroom, connected by a one-way mirror that Isabella had assured him was completely legal. "Observation room," she'd explained. "For HR investigations and legal consultations." Mark Dalton sat at the head of the long table, projecting confidence. The board members, 8 men and women in expensive suits, listened attentively as he presented his case. "I want to state clearly," Mark said, voice smooth as silk, "that I have no personal ambition here. My only concern is the stability of Vaughn Industries during this difficult time." Isabella sat at the opposite end of the table, composed and silent. She'd insisted on letting Mark speak first. "Miss Vaughn has given this company years of excellent leadership," Mark continued. "But recent events, the concerning incident 2 nights ago, the erratic behavior, the point of order," Isabella said quietly. The room fell silent. Mark's jaw tightened microscopically. "Yes, Miss Vaughn? You mentioned an incident 2 nights ago. Could you clarify what you're referring to?" Mark hesitated, just for a moment. "Interesting that you call it a mugging." Isabella stood, her movements deliberate. The police report classifies it as targeted assault. The security footage from our parking garage shows the attacker had building access. He knew exactly where to wait. He bypassed 3 separate security checkpoints. One of the board members, an older woman with steel gray hair, leaned forward. "I'm stating facts, Margaret." Isabella pressed a button on the remote in her hand. The screen behind her lit up with security footage. "This is Thomas Reeves, a contractor who's worked on 7 Vaughn Industries projects over the past 2 years. All projects personally approved by Mark Dalton." The footage showed a man attacking Isabella from behind. Even in black and white, the brutality was clear. Mark's face had gone pale. "I don't understand what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm presenting evidence." Isabella clicked again. Financial records appeared. "Thomas Reeves is employed by Dalton Enterprises, which is owned by Philip Dalton. Your brother, Mark, that's a family business. It has nothing to do with. It has everything to do with $30 million in fraudulent construction contracts." Isabella's voice cut like a blade. Every project Dalton Enterprises touched had cost overruns. Every single one. Materials that exceeded budget. Timeline extensions that required additional funding. And every approval bore your signature. The board erupted in overlapping voices. Mark stood, hands raised. "This is a misunderstanding, is it?" Isabella clicked the remote again. "This is Ryan Holt, a supervisor at Northline Engineering, the company we subcontract for structural work. Over the past 3 years, Ryan has personally approved 17 material orders from Riverside Materials Incorporated, another Dalton Enterprises subsidiary." Daniel watched Mark's expression crack. The man hadn't expected this level of evidence, hadn't expected Isabella to connect all the pieces. "Ryan Holt was recently investigated for fraud," Isabella continued. "He framed one of his engineers, Daniel Cross, for financial misconduct. But the real fraud was his relationship with your shell companies. Mark, the systematic theft, the coordination. You can't prove." The conference room door opened. 2 men in suits entered, followed by uniformed police officers. "Mark Dalton?" the lead detective asked. Mark's face went white. "What is this?" "You're under arrest for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit assault." The detective produced handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Daniel watched as Mark was led from the room, his protestations fading down the hallway. The board sat in stunned silence. Isabella turned to face them. "I apologize for the dramatics, but this situation required immediate action. Mark will face criminal charges. His brother Philip is also in custody, and I've personally contacted the district attorney about Ryan Holt's involvement." Margaret, the gray-haired board member, spoke first. "Isabella, does Vaughn Industries need new leadership?" "Vaughn Industries needs a thorough audit," Isabella replied, "which I'll be personally overseeing. If the board lacks confidence in my ability to lead during this process, I understand." The board members exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they shook their heads. "You just saved this company," another member said. "I think we're good." Daniel left the Sterling Tower at noon. Isabella had offered to have her driver take him home, but he'd declined. Some journeys needed to be walked. He made it 3 blocks before the tears came. Not tears of sadness. Tears of relief so profound they felt physical, like something breaking loose in his chest that had been locked there for months. Ryan Holt would face investigation. The evidence against him was now part of a criminal case, impossible to ignore. Daniel's name would be cleared, and Isabella had transferred $50,000 to his account. Consulting fee, she'd called it. Plus a bonus for excellent work, $50,000. Rent for a year. Food. Heat. Winter boots for Emma without holes. Maybe even a small apartment with heat that worked consistently. Daniel stopped at a grocery store. A real grocery store, not the discount mart he'd been rationing from. He filled a cart, bread, milk, eggs, fresh vegetables, fruit, a whole bag of bananas, cereal that wasn't generic, peanut butter, the good kind. At checkout, the total came to $93. He paid with his debit card and didn't feel panic when it approved. The walk to Ironwood Apartments took 40 minutes with grocery bags. Daniel didn't mind. The sun was out. The November cold felt less bitter somehow. He climbed the stairs to the third floor and stopped. 5 black SUVs lined the street below. Men in suits stood near the entrance, speaking into phones, faces serious. Daniel's first thought was police. His second was that something had gone wrong, that Mark had somehow retaliated. Then Isabella stepped out of the lead SUV. She looked up, saw him standing on the third-floor landing, and smiled. "Daniel," she called up, "we need to talk about your employment contract." Emma appeared at their apartment door, eyes wide. "Dad? Who are all these people?" Daniel looked at his daughter. At the grocery bags. At the 5 SUVs that represented a life he'd never imagined having access to. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said. "It's going to be okay." And for the first time in 2 years, he believed it. 3 months later, Daniel Cross stood in his new office at Vaughn Industries. Not a corner office, he'd declined that, but a proper workspace with a window, a real desk, and a title that meant something. Director of Project Integrity. His job was simple. Review every construction contract, verify every bid, ensure that what happened with Mark Dalton never happened again. Ryan Holt had been terminated from Northline Engineering. Criminal charges were pending. Aaron Wells had testified, and the company had offered him whistleblower protection. Last Daniel heard, Aaron was sleeping better at night. Emma had new shoes, new clothes, a bedroom of her own in the apartment they'd moved to, nothing fancy, but it had heat that worked and windows that didn't stick. She'd started at a new school, one with art programs and teachers who encouraged her brightness instead of just managing it. On Daniel's desk sat a framed photograph. Emma, smiling, holding a banana like it was treasure. Some days, Daniel still thought about that night at the bus terminal. About the $18 that had been everything and nothing. About the choice that had seemed impossible in the moment. He'd given away $5 to a stranger and received $50,000 in return. It sounded like karma, like cosmic justice, like proof that good deeds were rewarded. But Daniel knew better. He'd given $5 to someone who needed help. That was the whole transaction. Complete, fair. Everything that came after the investigation, the arrests, the new job that was something else. That was 2 people who'd been betrayed by the same system deciding to tear that system down. The reward wasn't for being good. The reward was for refusing to accept that good people always finished last. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Isabella. "Board meeting in 10. Bring the Riverside project files." He grabbed his briefcase, a real briefcase, leather, a gift from Isabella when he'd officially started, and headed for the elevator. On the ground floor, he passed the security desk. The guard nodded. "Afternoon, Mr. Cross." "Afternoon, James." Outside, the city moved with its usual chaos. Somewhere in this city, someone was counting their last dollars. Someone was making a choice between feeding their child and helping a stranger. Someone was standing at a bus terminal, wondering if kindness mattered. Daniel couldn't help all of them, but he'd helped one person, and she'd helped him back. Sometimes, that was enough to change everything. He took the elevator to the 15th floor, files in hand, ready to make sure one more project was built honestly. It wasn't saving the world, but it was keeping his corner of it a little cleaner, and that was something worth showing up for.